The Demon World War was a long war that would decide the fate of demons and humans. This great feud between the races ended when the hero Artorias defeated the great demon king named Valier. And with the death of Demon King, the whole world was filled with peace. Since the Empire had gone through a long and harsh war, they put tremendous effort to cultivate talent and find heroes of the generations to come. This led to the creation of the Academy for Talents from throughout the Empire, the special educational institute named Temple. The royal class of this academy was a special class composed of only geniuses in a school already filled with talented people. Ludwig was a just and hot-tempered boy who always scored the last place in the royal class. This was the background of a fresh action fantasy novel, The Demon King is Dead, which described the story of a peaceful world after the death of Demon King. This web novel was available to be read on Kakeopage website. Nevertheless, the readers posted hateful comments about how lame, boring, and childish the storyline was. Some readers even questioned the writing abilities of the author. The author frantically typed a reply justifying the story but suddenly fell unconscious on his keyboard. The author had gone through a severe heart attack due to high blood pressure he got from reading those hateful comments about his novel. The author stood cluelessly in front of his own dead body with a rather bossy lady beside him. She was the Grim Reaper Kim, an agent of Hell's Soul Management Department. She then explains how the author died due to a cardiac arrest from a surge in blood pressure and asked him to check the documents. The author could not believe and questioned if he really died because of high blood pressure he got from reading all those comments. The Grim Reaper got angry and said how many times would the author ask the same question. The author realized he would have to believe it since he had no other choice. He let it sink in that he was standing in his own room staring at his own corpse. He remembered his vision slightly fading and thought he had died in a pathetic way. The Grim Reaper asked him to take a decision if he had finished assessing the situation. The author was already in a shock, and yet he had to make a strange decision on such a short notice. The Grim Reaper had explained that in order to go to heaven, the dead person would first need to atone for the major sins they had committed. The author was shocked to see that his major sins listed in his document were quitting multiple serializations and writing stories with terrible continuity. The author was a novelist in his past life, around second or third-rate web novel writer, and was able to somehow earn a living. The crimes he committed were the irresponsible ways of frequently dropping his own series. He recalled he was shameless and would write a new novel under a different account. In this world, everyone had to atone in a different way. He tried to confront the Grim Reaper if his sin even counted as a major sin. The Grim Reaper said that though his sin was fairly small in terms of impact on single individual, it had increased the scale of issue since it happened too many times to many people. Hence, as a responsible novelist, he would have to atone by picking one of his completed novels where he would be randomly reborn as one of the novel's characters. He would then have to survive till the very end. The author wanted to shout that this was a 100% transmigration story and wasn't fairly lax when some people ended up with one-way ticket to hell. The Grim Reaper casually said that it was his own novel, so he should already know the whole story. In her opinion, this was more of a reward than a punishment. The author replied that the prospects of this being a reward or punishment depended on the novel because, as far as he could recall, all the novels written by him had far from happy endings. His list of completed novels included City of the Dead, which was a zombie apocalypse story and guaranteed that he would become zombie food in less than a day. His second novel, Surviving in the Ruined World, was an apocalypse survival story and again guaranteed an early death. His next novel, The Hunter Became a Manager, was a modern hunter-based action story. There were high chances that he would end up as an extra rather than the hunter and get trampled by a monster. The next novel also guaranteed an early death. The novel Somehow, the Game Became Reality But My Occupation is Cleaner was a dungeon-based action game fantasy where 90% of humanity died in the process of the game system taking over reality. He had no confidence that he would survive even if it was one of his own novels. He realized that maybe he had only one choice: The Demon King is Dead novel, which was a slice-of-life academy story set in a fantasy background. He gulped and realized that though he ended up dead reading the hateful comments on this very novel, this was the best choice he had now. He recalled that it's a sweet slice-of-life academy story after a war. The final boss dies at the very start of the story, and the further novel was all about after stories, hence his chances of dying would be less. Since it's going to be random, he hoped he will not become any major character of the novel and would even get lucky to become any of the academy student. As he stood thinking as to why the novel failed and what was in the later half of the story, the Grim Reaper called on him to finalize his option or else she would do it for him. Frantically, he screamed that he would go for The Demon King is Dead novel. The Grim Reaper wished him good luck, clapped her hands, and the author found himself standing in a royal room. He realized he had horns on his head now and was wearing a classy outfit. A status window appeared bearing the details of his identity and skills. He was a bit confused to be named as Valier Jr., the lowest grade Demon King. He was sure there was no such character in the novel he had written. Before he could realize anything, a loud explosion occurred and he fell on the lower floor. Another status window appeared confirming the prologue event as the trigger of ruination and assigning the mission to escape the Demon King's castle. Valier was stunned as a corpse of demon dangled on his head. So, the author ended up in the novel he wanted but not as the character he would have imagined. He was a character that never even appeared in his novel age 17, no combat ability and a prince of the collapsing demon realm. Valier ran across the crumbling corridors, cussing at the Grim Reaper for scamming him into an unwritten character. The author was now Valier the Demon King's son, caught in the middle of the final battle between his father and the hero. As per the novel, both the hero and Demon King die at the end, and the war draws to a close with the victory of humans. Hence, Valier concluded that he will be executed as soon as he gets caught. Valier started devising ways to stay alive and realized he did not have any great stats. He supposed that being reborn as the final boss would have been better, but now he was stuck with no special abilities. He came across a warehouse and searched the boxes in the hopes of finding something useful. Valier continued to dig in all the chests he could find in the warehouse and stumbled upon a magic scroll book. This book could help even a non-magic user to perform certain spells. He turned the pages and found a teleportation scroll which could transport the user to a specified location. Excited at the prospect of finally being able to escape being buried under the rubble, Valier performed the teleportation spell, but all in vain. The status screen informed him that the magic had been cancelled due to a barrier. He searched the book of spells again and decided to use the camouflage spell to save his life. Valier transformed himself into a human prisoner and with a trembling heart went down the steps towards prison cells. His escape plan was to infiltrate into the prison as a human, get saved by the Imperial Army along with other prisoners and find the opportunity to run away. He stepped inside the dark, quiet prison cell and was greeted with the stench of blood. Horrified to have stepped on a human hand, Valier was shocked to see the prison full of mutilated human corpses. A sharp tremor shuddered his body as he couldn't understand this gore situation in the novel, which was supposed to be a rom-com. With no other choice in hand, he walked further and noticed a girl crying over a body very similar to her own. Valier approached her and explained that he himself was a prisoner. Valier observed that the body near her was quite similar to the girl and thought they must be related. He tried comforting her and said it would be best if they could wait to be saved together. The girl trembled and said it was okay for him to sit beside her. The girl said that Valier was pretty calm, to which he replied that he was actually very scared. Valier noticed a packet of crackers he had from the very beginning in his clothes. He offered them to the girl and she looked completely taken aback. Hesitating to do so, she took the packet and slowly started munching on the crackers. Valier was shocked to see the small bites she was taking because he expected her to be starving after all this time. Suddenly they heard footsteps approaching and someone exclaiming to have found the prison cells. Valier gulped as he saw a human army approaching towards them and found their reaction to be a little off. The man kneeled down to them and expressed his apologies for not saving the Imperial Highness sooner. Valier was astonished to know the girl sitting beside him was the Guardias Empire's first Imperial princess named Charlotte de Guardias. A status screen appeared confirming that Valier had cleared the ruination event and acquired 100 achievement points. The Imperial Army Field military camp was abuzz with soldiers serving and guarding the princess along with Valier, her savior. Though being saved by the Imperial Army alongside the princess was a good thing, Valier found himself stuck in the situation. After all, he was a demon, fooling the others with the low-ranking magic of camouflage. If by any chance his magic gets dispelled, it will all be over for him. On top of that, there was no way for him to escape the military grounds because the princess had requested for special care of Valier. The princess was not the original character of the novel written by Valier, and that bothered him. Princess Charlotte and Valier sat across each other having lunch with a ferocious knight named Lance serving them. Princess thanked him for the hospitality, and the knight informed her that she would be able to return to the Imperial Palace as soon as Duke Silurian arrives. The princess thanked Valier for what he had done in the prison. Valier said that he had done nothing at all, but the princess certainly saw him as a great help. She promised to ensure his safe return to his hometown and asked him where he was from. Valier was unable to come up with a name and noticed Lance staring at him. He made up the story that he couldn't remember anything. With tears welling up her eyes, the princess promised that she would help him recover his lost memories. Valier couldn't believe the princess was so naive but still thanked her. Valier was certain that Princess Charlotte will die soon because there was not a single description of her in the original novel. She was just a result of an automatically generated backstory. Moreover, the author's original character Bertus the Prince, Charlotte's brother, would never let his competition live. Valier sat there with a forced smile, caught up in a debate with himself whether he should try to save the princess. But he himself was in a fix. The princess requested Lance to get a doctor for her since she felt uneasy. Lance didn't want to leave her alone, but she insisted. As soon as he left the tent, Valier was taken aback by the complete transformation in the princess's personality. Princess Charlotte first apologized Valier for the deadly consequences which awaited him because of her. She was certain to be assassinated in the near future due to her step-sibling Prince Bertus. She was aware that most people in the camp were her enemies and had no intention to deliver the message of her being alive. After all, she was covered by a thick coat after being rescued so that people might not know of the survivors from the Demon King's castle. She explained there were high chances of them both being killed to safeguard this secret. Valier realized they could not even trust Lance for this purpose. The princess calmly asked him not to worry since she had already made a promise to help him regain his memories. She had already devised a plan to get them both out of here. She would try to grab the attention of everyone and Valier would have to fetch Sir Francis. Sir Francis was the knight who had saved them from the demon's castle, and he was one of the rare people loyal to the imperial family itself. Valier saw this as an opportunity to save his life and agreed upon the plan. The princess offered to be the bait in the escape plan, held Valier's hand and requested him to hurry up. Princess Charlotte stepped outside the tent and distracted the guards. This gave enough time for Valier to get outside. On inquiring about Sir Francis from a soldier, he was told that he had returned to the demon's castle for a mission requested by Lance. Valier realized Lance was being a step ahead of the princess. Valier said that Sir Francis was in danger, thinking the soldier might go after him. Naturally, he didn't seem bothered at first, but after a little convincing, the soldier said he would trust Valier given that he looked quite desperate for help. The soldier said Sir Francis himself had predicted a possibility of something bad happening to Princess Charlotte. Sir Francis had asked the soldier to stand guard that someone might come for help. Valier thought that if Sir Francis already knew of the possibilities, then why would he leave the princess alone? The soldier casually asked Valier to come along with him and introduced himself as Lieutenant Dyrus. With no idea that Lance was listening to their conversation from the shadows, Dyrus and Valier started off for the demon's castle. Passing through the towns, Valier noticed demons being taken as prisoners by humans. Dyrus told Valier that they would all be executed, and Valier gulped at the possibility of ending up like them. They arrived at the castle and inquired for Sir Francis from the knights in charge. Dyrus told them Valier was here to deliver a confidential message to Sir Francis. The knights said they had just received a report that Sir Francis died in the battle with demon remnants and told them to return. Valier was in a complete shock but refused to believe that Sir Francis could be killed by demons. He was certain that Bertus had something to do with all this, as he did not want anyone to know that the princess was alive. Dyrus asked Valier to tell him the truth, and with no other option in hand, he decided to take a chance on Lieutenant Dyrus. On hearing his whole story, Dyrus was sure that Sir Francis was killed by the internal knights rather than the demons. To Valier's delightful surprise, Lieutenant Dyrus pledged to save the princess. Still being cautious of Lieutenant's intentions, Valier devised a plan to enter the demon castle again to acquire anything useful for the escape with Princess. Upon seeing the condition of the supplies room, Lieutenant Dyrus was sure that someone had already rummaged through it. Valier didn't reveal that it was him who had done so just a day ago. Valier quickly found the mass teleport scroll and the scroll book which he had used earlier to transform into a human. Lieutenant Dyrus got suspicious of Valier since he knew exactly where to find the scrolls and also the corridors of the demon castle. They hurried to exit the castle but stopped on hearing approaching footsteps. Those knights belonged to the Silurian Duchy, one of the strongest noble families of the empire, who wanted to enthrone Bertus as king. They were high-ranking knights of noble status and were currently on the lookout for Dyrus and Valier. Hiding behind a stone statue, they could hear the knights talking when one of them suddenly confirmed their location and asked them to come out. Shocked as to how the knights located them, Valier and Dyrus stepped out. As the lieutenant and knights prepared to fight each other, Valier couldn't believe he would come all the way back to the castle just to be killed in it. He looked at the gargoyle stone statue beside him and thought they would generally move in novels and games. To his surprise, the gargoyle statue's eyes gleamed red at that very instant and it struck the knights dead. In a complete shock as to how all this happened, Dyrus took the hand of Valier and escaped the castle. Dyrus rode the horse as fast as he could, still in utter confusion of how the gargoyle statue moved. Valier had previously seen the ability of demon domination on his status screen, which probably helped him move the statue. Soon they realized a number of the Silurian knights were already on their trail. Valier used the scroll book to hasten the speed of their horse, but the knights started shooting their arrows on them. Dyrus held onto Valier as he performed the surefire illusion and charm magic on the horses instead of the knights. Valier had himself written the temple's curriculum, including horse riding, hence he was certain of what he was doing. One by one the horses started falling behind. However, Valier had run out of scrolls and two knights were still closely following them. Valier saw some demon prisoners being taken for detention, and he suddenly had the same feeling he had when the gargoyle statue moved in the castle. At once, one of the orc's eyes turned red and he charged towards the remaining knights. This gave enough time for Dyrus and Valier to escape. Getting help from demons twice made Dyrus even more suspicious, but he prioritized saving the princess first. They made it back to the military grounds but were stopped from meeting the princess. Lieutenant Dyrus struck the knight with his sword and made way for Valier. Seizing the opportunity, Valier ran into the tent of Princess, took her hand and in a flash performed the mass teleport magic to the imperial capital Guardium. His status screen displayed a historic turning point since the princess had survived, which had further changed the future greatly. Guardium was modeled after the city of Seoul where the author, now Valier, was born. And still, Valier was startled at the grandeur of the city. He realized he cannot afford to be in author's mode as he currently had a lot to take care of. The princess was in sheer confusion as to what had happened. Valier explained her that he was unable to find Sir Francis and had performed the teleportation magic which brought them to Guardium City. Startled at the sight of Lieutenant Dyrus walking out of a blue light, the princess asked who he was. Dyrus introduced himself and gave her a complete report of what had transpired back at the demon's castle. Valier was thankful that they had a spare scroll or else Dyrus would have died. All three of them made their way through the busy market as Dyrus explained how he and Valier got saved by demons twice, that too coincidentally. Valier was certain that the whole story would direct a suspicion towards his real identity, hence he escaped the group. With a growling stomach, Valier sat on a footpath, thinking he should have written in the novel that a demon can sustain himself with only mana. The status screen appeared abruptly stating that such a setting was possible but would require 1,000,000 achievement points. Other than that, the screen showed a number of rules, cheat codes and a list of challenges for Valier to gain achievement points on their completion. On seeing the list of hellishly difficult quests and complicated rules, Valier asked for a summarized list. The status screen displayed 3 major rules. He was then presented with an advice from the author to visit the magic item store. Valier realized that he could sustain himself by selling the scroll and hence set off towards Aligar District Commerce area. He visited several magic item stores but all in vain. All of the owners thought that he was scamming them with fake scrolls. One of the owners even asked him to draw the scroll for a cheap price. Valier decided against it and entered another shop. It seemed there was no one inside the messy store but a red-haired woman appeared behind him. She was shocked on seeing the scroll Valier had brought and inquired where he had brought it from since she recognized that the scroll magic could only be used by demons. The red-haired woman was furious upon seeing that scroll and kept questioning Valier how he got it. Valier was trying his best to come up with a decent story for he realized this woman was a real mage unlike the other shop owners. She was able to see right through the demon magic while others only thought of it to be a screwed up version. Her anger increased with every passing minute and Valier tried to seek help from his status screen. At last, he was left with no choice other than to reveal the real events which had happened in the past few days. Though unagreeable at first, the mage trusted on the whole story. She even pitied on him when Valier acted up on how he could be next on the assassination list of Bertus after having saved the princess. To his surprise, the mage hugged him saying it all must have been very tough for him and that he had worked really hard. She said there might have been a curse in the demon castle and that she would rid Valier of it. Before Valier could stop her, she had already performed a release curse on him. Valier stood there in a complete shock as to what waited for him next. The mage was stunned to see the demon form of Valier and before he could provide any explanation, the mage bowed down referring to him as Your Highness. The way she talked to him made it evident that she had known him from before. Valier could not understand what was going on as the mage slowly transformed into a vampire. She asked him repeatedly if he really didn't remember her and took him upstairs lest someone would see them in their real forms. She fed Valier and said it was very fortunate that he brought the scroll to her of all people. She introduced herself as Elleris, a member of the Demon King Army's Guardium Infiltration Squad Tuesday and pledged to serve Valier from now onwards. On being asked, she told him she had to choose a residence with a store attached in order to save on the rent. She informed that there were 2 other demons living in the imperial capital. One member was active under the false identity of Count Argon Pontius by the name of Sarkagar and was a dreadfiend in reality. He was born with the ability to use high-rank transformation magic. The other one was a lycanthrope going by the name of Lawyer Irene's Wild Dog. Sarkagar was the one who had kidnapped the imperial princess Charlotte and hence Valier decided to stay cautious of him. On the other hand, Lawyer led a gang of Guardiums Undercity. Using her excellence of close combat, she had created a force of her own and was responsible for the infiltration squad's funding. Valier was stupefied to know Irene raised funds by selling gums on the street. Elleris said she was relieved to have met Valier since now they can rebuild the demon world. Valier interrupted her saying that he had no such intentions. Rebuilding the demon world would mean going on a war with humans all over again and Valier had seen enough sufferings of both the sides in the recent war. He said the act of rallying the demon folk again would be a suicide mission. Elleris was shocked to hear such words from the demon prince and tried convincing Valier, to which he replied that the demon world is dead and even she should stop acting as a servant of a dead nation. Elleris excused herself and asked Valier to rest well. As she turned around, Valier was bewildered to spot a hint of happiness on her face. Dazed by the incredible beauty of Elleris, Valier tried to sleep but couldn't. He tried to have a small talk with her, asking how was he in the past. Elleris tried her best to describe Valier's past in positive words, but Valier could read between the lines that he had definitely not been a normal person. She said she had arranged a meeting with the other demons for the next day when Valier suddenly realized where would Elleris sleep if he was sleeping on her bed. To his shock, Elleris slept beside him. For Valier, every moment after his transmigration had been hell so far, but in this moment, he was extremely happy. Finally, with the daylight, Valier and Elleris were ready to infiltrate the world of humans, which was rejoicing in its victory over the demonfolk. The city was alive with the celebrations of Princess's return, the Demon King's death, and the win of Artorias, the hero. Elleris and Valier took the train towards south of Bronze Gate near the Irene Riverside. Their destination was a complete bum's nest as per Valier. As Elleris led him towards the end of sewer line, Loyar recognized their scent from afar. Loyar at once bowed down to Valier as he looked at her in astonishment. They waited for Sarkagar's arrival, and Elleris informed Loyar that the demon prince had lost all his memory except for his identity. To Valier's surprise, Loyar was relieved to know this, as now the prince wouldn't order her to act like a dog as he had before. Valier stood bewildered as she recalled those incidents, and Elleris made fun of Loyar. Valier apologized for his past mistakes and made truce with her and said he'll be careful in the future. In the meantime, Sarkagar came running towards them, screaming in delight to be able to serve the demon prince. He showered Valier with mighty compliments and begged Valier to stop the humans. Sarkagar was so loyal to the demon realm that he would sacrifice his soul just to see it prospering. All four of them sat around a bonfire to discuss their further plans. Sarkagar demanded to get revenge on the late Demon King and rebuild the empire. Valier said he was just a good-for-nothing little kid and all this was beyond his abilities. Sarkagar exclaimed that Valier was an archdemon and hence it was all well within his control. The other three were stunned when Valier inquired what he meant by the term archdemon. Elleris explained that demons used to live in a merciless war zone where blood never dried as demons destroyed each other over petty fights. Until one day, one demon species stopped the never-ending war and united the Dark Land. They interfered with the minds of the demons, and the demons gave them the title of archdemon out of respect. Later it became synonymous with the Demon King's species. Valier then asked if anyone had plans on how they should proceed. Sarkagar suggested for Valier to become stronger by attending the Empire's famous educational institution Temple. Valier was surprised to see both Loyar and Elleris nodding their head in approval. Valier tried to get out of the situation by saying it would be a huge risk if his identity got exposed in front of all those royal students. Sarkagar handed over his ring to Valier, which would allow him to change his appearance however he wished. And so, it was decided for Valier to attend the temple with a fake status and a fake name as well, Reinhardt. Loyar introduced Valier, now Reinhardt, with her younger brother Daebun. Daebun was to take Reinhardt to the temple next day to acquire his ID. Daebun was fine with all that, but he questioned how they all would pay for Reinhardt's hefty tuition fees. Loyar was shocked as to how they all forgot this important point. Her younger brother Daebun reminded her that they could never cover the temple's tuition with their current income. After all, it was the best educational institute of the continent where children from prestigious families came to study. Daebun said it was only possible if they reduced the amount Loyar took from the gang's budget, but she refused. Reinhardt came up with the idea to cover the tuition fees of just one semester as of now. Later, he could probably earn a scholarship. Even if he was the lowest grade demon, Reinhardt was an archdemon and he hoped that it would help him. In worst case scenario, he can learn a talent from his status screen by gaining achievement points. Loyar agreed with this idea, but Daebun said they would still need to find money to cover the admission fee. He was worried of their low revenue since very few people came by the Bronze Gate Bridge these days. Reinhardt suggested to change their way of thinking to increase on their funds. He went on to explain that if customers were not coming to them, they should reach out to the customers. For example, sell toys at the Mana train station, which was full of people. With their kids whining for the toys, the parents will have to buy even the defective ones. Daebun agreed with the idea and Loyar almost called Reinhardt a clever bastard in excitement. Reinhardt could tell what Loyar was about to call him and decided to discipline her a bit. He extended his hand to her and instinctively she started behaving like his pet dog. Everyone had a good laugh and Daebun took Reinhardt for a drink. They had a lot of fun drinking away the night together with the gang. When everyone was exhausted and passed out, Reinhardt asked Daebun about the gang and its activities. Reinhardt couldn't understand how Loyar was able to earn enough money to back the infiltration team, a magic tool store, a nobleman, and even support themselves. Before Daven could reveal anything, Loyar walked inside the room unexpectedly and scolded them for getting drunk just a day before the admission. She dragged Reinhardt out of the room and he took the opportunity to ask Loyar of her earning ways. Loyar apologized for not explaining earlier. She didn't mean to hide anything but didn't want to trouble the demon prince. Reinhardt suspected if they did anything which could harm people. Loyar agreed that it did turn out that way sometimes but not always. The gangs actually helped the guild collect information as beggars. She confirmed that he can forget about the gang after entering the temple. Reinhardt decided to go to sleep as it seemed she wouldn't tell him anymore. The next day, Reinhardt and Daven headed to the Imperial Capital's Administration Bureau. They got the ID made quite easily and proceeded for the admission office. The counseling office was full of people trying to test if their kids possessed any outstanding talent which would waive off their fee entirely. They went ahead for the admission window to submit the fee of first semester, but the receptionist declined their request, saying it was against the newly formed rules of the temple. With no other option in sight, Reinhardt asked Daven to head back home, but Daven was hell-bent on getting Reinhardt tested for any superpower he might possess. It was free of cost to get examined, and Daven said they should do everything they could to get him admission. The receptionist went ahead and asked Reinhardt to place his hand on a crystal ball. She was bewildered at the report outcome and thought the machine must be broken. She went inside and brought another crystal ball and couldn't believe at the outcome report. Daven couldn't contain his excitement over what the report said. The receptionist explained that according to the examination, Reinhardt was born with an aptitude for everything in this world. Aptitudes were an inferior version of talents and were not enough to call someone overwhelmingly genius. However, it did show that one will have good results if they worked hard in that direction. The results also made it clear that Reinhardt was capable of using both holy and dark magic, and there had been no one like this in the history of the Empire. Though Daven and Loyar were overjoyed at this discovery, this is not what Reinhardt had imagined to be. The three of them sat observing Loyar's gang members sell gum on the streets and discussed the infinite aptitude ability. Reinhardt realized that due to this ability, he could choose to excel in whichever talent he wanted, be it specializing in close combat or magic or even archery. Daven observed his expressions and asked why Reinhardt didn't seem happy. Reinhardt answered that he was indeed happy to receive a scholarship and not be a burden on the gang. Daven credited himself for all this development since he was the one to force Reinhardt into taking up the examination. Reinhardt planned to join the main story next semester, and his thoughts got clouded by the elite students of Class 1A, with plenty financial support and extravagant dormitories in the temple. He couldn't believe he was put in the same class as them, and even Elleris was astounded to know that. Elleris asked what was troubling Reinhardt. His thoughts were still occupied at the thought of finally meeting the main characters of his own novel. The main protagonist, Ludwig, was a transfer student in Class 1B who stood up against the taunts of Class A. To conclude, Class 1A was full of arrogant rich kids with surmounting egos. Reinhardt expressed his concern of surviving in such cutthroat competition with merely aptitude, and Elleris comforted him, saying she would always support him. Elleris was startled when he suddenly asked why she wanted him to attend the temple anyway. He said it was quite probable for him to harbor ill feelings against humans in the temple, which could change his mind about starting a war. Elleris maintained her calm posture, saying she'll deal with problems when they come by. She presented him with a suitcase full of clothes and a gleaming red necklace. She explained there used to be 7 vampire clans referred to as 7 Knights. 2 of them got extinct along with their magic, and the other 5 clans specialized in the elements corresponding to their name, passing it on from generations. That necklace was also a treasure from Elleris clan and a symbol of the clan's leader, the Flame of Tuesday. Just like Sarkagar's ring, this was her gift for Reinhardt. This necklace would allow him to use as much fire magic as his reserves would allow, and its power would depend on how negatively he felt towards the other person. Reinhardt thanked her and promised not to use it until his graduation. On the other hand, Loyar gifted him a bag full of gold coins as his allowance, and he was free to use it as he wished. Loyar showered him with a long list of advices, and Reinhardt pushed her out of his room, saying he was not a small kid. At last, when he was alone in his room, he could concentrate his thoughts on a crucial problem he had been trying to recall from the very beginning. Though this story was supposed to be relaxing one, unlike all his other novels, he was unable to give it a happy end. In the middle of the story, a gate from another world would open with 1,000 monsters pouring out, leading the world on the brink of annihilation. He sat with his head hung in shame over his past decisions, with no way in sight to outdo the consequences. He even thought of disappearing altogether, but then why should the others pay with their life for his crimes? He shook his head and pledged to get stronger while at the temple and find a way across this mess he had created. It was a fine weather the next day, and the temple was echoing with excited murmurs of the students and instructions being given on speakers across the campus. Reinhardt was amazed to see the lazy setting of his novel materialize into such a grand place. He made his way into the temple and found the insides to be even fancier. He caught the eye of the class president, who greeted him and helped him find the way to his room. Reinhardt thanked her and went ahead to unlock his room with the help of his ID card. Though he had got used to the magic, he still couldn't comprehend the grandeur of his dormitory, which was no less than a palace room. There was even a small welcome gift in the dorm bearing the map of temple, dorm rules, some snacks, notebook and a pen. With some time in hand, he jotted down the names of his classmates with the hope of remembering them all. The announcement was made for new students of royal class to gather at the central lobby, and he was puzzled to recall only a few names even with all the prep work done before. He glanced at the upper lobby and saw the upperclassmen of royal class glaring down at the freshmen. Suddenly he stumbled on the floor, screaming at the excruciating pain in his foot. A student apologized for stepping on his foot and helped him get up. Reinhardt was startled to meet the protagonist of his novel, Ludwig, in such a manner. They introduced themselves to each other and settled down. The welcome party started with the class president requesting everyone to take their assigned seats. Reinhardt observed there were 11 students in each class as opposed to 10 he had originally written in the novel. He somehow avoided the relentless questions about his infinite aptitude and was felt doomed to be seated last in the row. He was shocked to see Bertus admitted in the temple with his real name as opposed to the fake identity in the novel. All the others introduced themselves, but when it was turn of Reinhardt, people in the room started gossiping. But the most shocking thing for him was to see Princess Charlotte de Gardias as a student of Class B in the temple. The structures of outside power did not apply within the temple. With the exception of Bertus and Charlotte, none of the royal families have been in the royal class. Even the royal family cannot get in unless they prove themselves for their talent and skill. If Bertus graduates with excellent grades, that alone would grant him immense power. As the hidden villain of the novel, Bertus entering the royal class was his first step. However, both Bertus and Charlotte entering the temple together was never a part of the novel. He recalled that original Bertus of the novel awakens 3 talents necessary to become a masterclass, including combat, magic sensitivity, and mana control, which transforms Bertus into Swordmaster. Reinhardt was busy with these thoughts as the president went on and on with the rules of the temple. He thought maybe the talents of Charlotte fell behind those of Bertus, which is why she was in Class B. The class president ordered that everyone be treated with equality, or else there would be serious consequences leading to expulsion from the academy. She announced there was a special rule ordered by the Gardias royal palace. As per the rule, if Bertus or Charlotte are harmed in any way, regardless how minor, the other party would be permanently deprived of their right to the throne. Reinhardt understood this rule was not only meant for them but for their followers in and out of the temple as well. Reinhardt closely observed as Bertus made his way across the class dorm, already taming a guy with words alone. A black-haired student crossed his path and Bertus apologized for having taken her place as a 1. She said she doesn't mind stuff like this. Reinhardt recognized that this was Ellen Artorias, the little sister of the hero Ragan Artorias, who sacrificed himself to kill the Demon King. She herself was a genius with the revenge talent, almost too good to be even a 1. Ludwig entered the dorm greeting everyone with much enthusiasm, but was met with cold stares. He went ahead to greet Reinhardt and Bertus smirked as they shook hands. Harriet exclaimed in pride that it felt awful when someone from Class B meddled with the lives of Class A students. She pushed Ludwig, who was saved from falling down by Bertus. Harriet lost her words on being confronted for her insensitivity by Bertus himself. She was the daughter of a duke and her talent was magic. Then Bertus introduced himself to Ludwig and apologized for the ill manners of Harriet as she stood with her head hung in shame, and the others appreciated the prince. Suddenly Reinhardt's status window appeared stating he won 100 achievement points for surviving the first day in the temple. He was pretty angry to see such a small improvement in the number of points and realized he will have to pick one talent and cultivate it. He decided to go ahead with supernatural abilities. These abilities were extremely weak on first manifesting, being hard to control and required repetitive training. Reinhardt was determined to gather more achievement points before buying a supernatural ability. Although the royal class entrance ceremony was held separately, the procedure was very simple. The head teacher introduced them to the homeroom teacher of each class and led them to the private class building near the dorms. Their homeroom teacher, Mr. Eppinhauser, seemed to be quite well composed and strict. He explained a brief schedule of their classes and assigned Bertus as the temporary leader for class management. The teacher ordered the students to call him immediately if a big fight breaks out, since the institute has always tried to the best of their abilities to prevent students from killing each other. He warned everyone to be careful of each other, but the students took this quite lightly. The teacher informed them that though they were an asset to the empire, there were chances that they proved to be a threat to others. Hence, as their instructor, he was permitted to immediately punish those individuals. This sounded more like a death threat and struck an alarming sensation across the classroom. The teacher called 11, Reinhardt, to the staff room and inquired about his lack of talent. Unlike his other classmates who had specified abilities leading them to have a specific class schedule, Reinhardt would have to select one. He expressed his intention of going for supernatural abilities since that costed the least achievement points as per his status window. The teacher didn't look very pleased with his choice, but anyway handed him the schedule. He also warned Reinhardt that he would be kicked out in the event of not being able to prove himself. He said it was quite difficult to manifest a supernatural ability and hence he must find other interests in the meantime. His thoughts were occupied with the helping nature of the teacher as he walked towards his classroom. He was bewildered to find everyone staring at him as he walked to his seat. Reinhardt kept his calm as Kair tried to create a ruckus about the fact that he got admitted in the royal class without any talent, and not even Class B. He questioned whether that was the reason why Reinhardt had shaken hands with Class B fellow as Bertus looked at them with a grin. Reinhardt calmly asked him to shut up and not make a scene out of the decisions taken by the admission cell. He raised his voice retaliating as to why should he be held responsible for their decisions, which scared Kair. Reinhardt placed his hand on his head and Kair screamed as if he was about to get beaten up. Scared out of his wits, Kair returned to his seat and Reinhardt noticed Bertus grinning at him again. All the other students got scared of Reinhardt, and though he had put on a calm face, inside he screamed at the possibility of others flagging him as some talentless dude with anger issues. Reinhardt couldn't be at peace even during the recess as his mind kept wandering over the fact that Brutus was grinning at him. While everyone enjoyed the royal meal, Reinhardt immersed himself in self-loathing for fighting with Kair. As the day proceeded, the difference between Class A and Class B got very clear. Reinhardt observed the story unfolding quite similarly to how he had written. The competitive atmosphere of Class A, the jolly-natured Class B students, and Harriet being smitten by Bertus the Prince. On the other table, he saw Ludwig force-feeding Charlotte for her fast recovery. The physical training class right after lunch seemed to be quite overtaxing for the students, especially for Reinhardt. Students gasped, burning the last of their energies to complete the laps. Harriet couldn't run anymore and the teacher said she'd be already dead if this were a battlefield. Ludwig caught up with Reinhardt and motivated him. Both of them were shocked to see the energy and speed of Ellen. Reinhardt recalled he had written in the novel that the only thing Ludwig could match Ellen in was stamina. Completely out of energy, Reinhardt tried his best to complete the push-ups and Harriet criticized the curriculum to be too harsh. Reinhardt saw Charlotte sitting on a bench since she had been exempted from exercising till her full recovery. At long last the class came to an end and everyone retired to their changing rooms. Reinhardt was changing his clothes when Kair approached him again and started making fun of his low energy levels. He criticized him for acting all big in the class when he can't even run properly. Reinhardt retaliated with words but Kair pushed him to the ground for talking back to him. The fight escalated quickly and Reinhardt punched Kair with full force. Reinhardt and Kair continued fighting and were soon surrounded by students. They tried their best to stop the fight and finally called on the teacher. Mr. Eppenhauser stared and scolded them for having a fist fight on the very first day of school. Kair put the whole blame onto Reinhardt and the teacher asked Reinhardt if he had really hit first. He replied in the positive but also accused Kair of undermining the temple's authority. Both Kair and Mr. Eppenhauser were taken aback by his response. On being asked for an explanation, Reinhardt said that even after repeatedly reminding Kair not to question the temple's decisions, Kair kept questioning Reinhardt's admission to the royal class. None of Kair's justifications could not justify the heavy words in which Reinhardt described the whole situation. After all, Reinhardt knew everything that angers or pleases the novel characters he had made. Hence, with tears in his eyes, he showcased Kair's remarks over his admission as an insult to the Guardia's empire. Reinhardt stood up and apologized for his rashness, knowing very well in his heart that Mr. Eppenhauser's patriotism trait for the temple and the Guardia's empire would compel him to detain Kair instead of him. He knew that the teacher was also just towards all of his students and hence he would realize that Kair spoke thoughtlessly, and Reinhardt overanalyzed the things. Mr. Eppenhauser asked Kair to stay back and Reinhardt to proceed to his class. As he made his way inside the classroom, Reinhardt could sense all the eyes on him. He was convinced that others would not only think of him as talentless, but also as a person having a mean personality. Nevertheless, he acquired 200 points and his status screen presented a number of extreme challenges to acquire more. Reinhardt sat there, annoyed over the fact that either the challenges were impossible or could have him expelled from the temple. Suddenly, Mr. Eppenhauser walked inside the class with Kair behind him. Kair sat quietly with a defeated, solemn expression on his face, and Reinhardt was relieved to realize he won't be picked upon by him ever again. Mr. Eppenhauser asked Bertus to collect the pre-registration forms from everyone. Some of the students submitted the form and proceeded to their dorms. However, half the students, including Reinhardt, stayed back still unsure of what to select on the form. While filling out his form, Reinhardt heard Erich cussing at Scarlet and screaming at her to go away. The author had made this character, Scarlet, a symbol of ominosity. Scarlet would get bullied for no reason other than because of her red hair. According to Elleris, while it is the symbol of courage and bravery, it was edited for continuity because of Archdemon's red hair and eyes. Thanks to that, she was abandoned by her parents and roamed the streets looking for food. She just withstood the bullying because she'd have nowhere to go without the temple. Though later down the story, she befriends Ludwig and doesn't get bullied anymore, Reinhardt felt bad for her. With all the achievement points, it was time for Reinhardt to buy his first talent. Reinhardt returned to his dorm and saw the self-suggestion skill on the talent list. He had rejected the self-suggestion talent while writing the novel since it was too much of cheat ability. Through this talent it was possible to make the impossible happen by hypnotizing oneself. It was a setting that exists, but was not used, more like an unused code in a video game. Reinhardt proceeded to buy the self-suggestion talent since it had low point requirements. He was shocked to see a locked symbol beside it with level 0 marked even after buying it. He held his head realizing he was scammed into it. Most people that have supernatural abilities as talents have already awakened their powers. But sometimes, very rarely, there are people with dormant abilities, and Reinhardt bought a dormant supernatural ability. Now, to awaken it he would have to purposefully experience an extreme scenario. Since the prices of other talents had increased now, the only option left would be to collect more achievement points. He scrolled through the tasks and decided on the one to get a love confession. There was more than just the school inside the large education complex of the temple. Since there was a large civilian population along with the students, the existence of a commercial district was only natural. Restaurants, cafes, clothing stores, arcades, you name it. Hence, the temple main street was the favorite place for students to hang out. In one such cafes, Kair, Kono and Erich were enjoying a meal. While Kohn and Kair were commoners, Erich belonged to a noble family. Kair was still disappointed that the teacher had scolded him instead of Reinhardt, and his friends were trying to cheer him up. The three were not supposed to become friends this quickly as per the original novel, but they bonded strongly on the very first day itself due to their common disgust for the talentless Reinhardt. They were discussing as to how the situation turned against Kair even though Reinhardt was at fault. Their conversation then shifted to the beautiful girls of their class. They sat voting for who found which girl to be the best. Their conversation was interrupted by a pretty girl who requested to talk to Kono in private. They headed outside and the girl gave him a note expressing her love for him. Kono was completely taken aback and blushed while accepting that even he had fallen for her at the first sight itself. The girl promised to meet him again soon and ran away. Kair and Erich watched them through the window and questioned their own looks and abilities to attract a girl. The girl was in fact Reinhardt, who had changed his appearance to receive a confession to earn some achievement points. Though he received the points for now, the window screen changed the rules for further tasks. From now onwards he would have to complete all tasks as Reinhardt itself. Reinhardt contemplated if it was okay for him to break a good guy's heart over few achievement points, but then he had no other choice. He selected another task to write a love letter and get rejected since it would be least embarrassing and won't lead to a punishment as per the rules of the temple. He dressed up, wrote a love letter and set off towards Ellen Artorius' dormitory. Ellen was fiercely practicing sword fighting at that time. She was startled to see Reinhardt at her door. Without thinking twice, Reinhardt handed over a note to her and requested her to read. Naturally, after reading the love letter she simply said no and resumed her practice session. Reinhardt walked back to his dorm with a smile on his face, feeling highly accomplished for he had acquired the achievement points without any embarrassment just like he had planned. The next day at the temple was as tiresome as the previous one. With wobbly knees and elbows due to exhaustion, the students practiced their sword fighting skills. Coincidentally, Reinhardt and Ellen stood beside each other while practicing, and while she appeared totally focused at the task at hand, he felt quite conscious of her presence. The troubled expressions of Reinhardt made it impossible for him to impress his teachers, who kept scolding him for not paying attention in the class. While the teachers shouted at him to stand properly and stretch out his arms, they were shocked and disappointed to know Reinhardt was a student of the royal class. On the other hand, they appreciated Ellen for her sword skills. The teacher then announced for a practice fight and assigned Reinhardt and Ellen as partners. Reinhardt was completely dumbstruck to stand against someone as powerful as Ellen. The other students were quite excited to watch a fight between the elite students of the royal class, and the teacher also gave them permission to feel free to go all out during the fight. All this put even more pressure on Reinhardt. As anticipated, before anyone could even bat an eye, Ellen struck Reinhardt with her wooden sword. Reinhardt fell unconscious to the ground. The next thing he knew, Reinhardt was lying on a hospital bed. He was startled to find Ellen sitting on his bedside. She apologized for striking him so hard since she didn't realize he won't be able to block her sword. She helped him to get up and they proceeded to have lunch together. Reinhardt playfully thought about getting a small revenge and suggested a cafe in the temple main street. He took her to a traditional restaurant and ordered cheonggukjang, a very spicy dish with a peculiar taste. Though Reinhardt fancied that dish, he was certain Ellen wouldn't like it. Just like Reinhardt had hoped, Ellen was horrified by the smell of the dish itself. Reinhardt laughed in his head and pushed her to eat it. This was actually a dish from Reinhardt's hometown and he was happy to find it here. Ellen found it quite hard to finish her food and Reinhardt had a good laugh about it. The next day Reinhardt attended lectures of various subjects so as to decide on one talent, as suggested by the teacher. The magic theory class sounded interesting but was far from being so. Without any hesitation, Reinhardt took his leave on seeing the magic formula itself. Next, he went on to the magic sensitivity training class. The instructors asked everyone to lie down on comfortable carpets and go on the relaxed mode. As the instructors explained how their bodies and minds were now united with the universe, Reinhardt dozed off. Naturally, everyone had a good sleep and Reinhardt understood why this class had the best reviews of all. Next, he went ahead for the supernatural ability control class. This class was full of royal students including Liana, Heinrich, Kono and Princess Charlotte as well. All of them were assigned personal trainers and in their guidance the students performed the supernatural ability which they had awakened. Liana de Grance had lightning powers and was applauded by her instructor for her control. However, Princess Charlotte's supernatural ability was restricted from being demonstrated in front of everyone and only a few teachers knew what it was. Heinrich displayed his fire generating and controlling skills and Kono tried teleportation which took quite an embarrassing turn. While everyone displayed their abilities, Reinhardt wondered if Bertus was aware about Charlotte's superpower or not. Reinhardt and his instructor sat on bench observing the others as she expressed her concern about his abilities. Reinhardt suggested it would be best if she could somehow help him awaken them by putting him in a dangerous situation. Heinrich, a student of royal class, stood there listening to their conversation. Reinhardt's instructor informed him if things kept going this way, she would have to restrict him from attending the class any further. Reinhardt walked down the corridor in deep thoughts when Heinrich approached him and started abusing him for considering the temple a joke. He questioned his presence in the supernatural class when he didn't have any ability at all. The other students looked on as Reinhardt calmly explained he hoped for his ability to be awakened while attending the class. However, Heinrich continued to bicker and even warned to cook Reinhardt alive with his fire-bending ability. It was too much for Reinhardt and he made fun of his skills saying his ability was not even enough to bake a potato. This irked Heinrich and he tried to talk back only to be insulted by Reinhardt yet again. Everyone watched them in apprehension as Heinrich proceeded to attack Reinhardt. Reinhardt just smacked him down with a single slap. It was almost funny to see Heinrich trying to regenerate his fire and being knocked down by Reinhardt again and again. Reinhardt explained how he had the upper hand since Heinrich's fire ability had a 5-meter radius only and took 10 seconds to activate. Heinrich was glued to the ground in fear as Reinhardt threatened to gouge out his eyeballs if he bothered him again. While sitting alone in the cafeteria to have dinner, Reinhardt could feel the students gossiping about him. He sulked realizing the vibe was completely off because of his presence when he heard Bertus calling out his name. The prince requested to have a chat with him. Bertus invited him to have tea in one of the fancy balconies of the temple. The prince poured out tea for Reinhardt as he watched him over in anticipation. He had a quiet demeanor and Reinhardt concluded that maybe Bertus didn't hold any malice towards him. However, he reminded himself to never let his guard down in front of the villain and smartest characters of his novel. No doubt Bertus could always suppress him physically since he was the future swordmaster. Bertus straight out informed him that everyone had been requesting him to do something about the crazy behavior of Reinhardt. Bertus said that everyone was scared of him, though he also agreed that Kair was at fault for using such harsh words against him. Bertus went on to say he had heard that Reinhardt lashed out not because he was insulted by Kair, but because Kair had insulted the temple. He said that as a student he should view everyone within Temple as equal, but he couldn't help but side with Temple as a patriot himself. The conversation took a weird turn and Bertus said that he really liked Reinhardt. This sent a shudder down the spine of Reinhardt and he said to himself that this was worse than a death threat. He couldn't believe his patriotic speech was so good that it impressed even Bertus. But according to Bertus, Reinhardt had gone too far when he messed up with Heinrich Schwarz. The Schwarz royal family was one of the most powerful families in the empire, and Bertus said all the other classmates were having some creative imagination about the matter. Everyone believed no one could possibly hit anyone from the Schwarz family unless they had a solid backing from somewhere. Hence, everyone was thinking Reinhardt might be a hidden royal family member, and Bertus asked if that was true. He thoughtfully observed Reinhardt, presenting different possibilities of why he could be hiding his royal family name or even a talent. Reinhardt bluntly replied that was not the case. He said that he just didn't want to be cowardly guy who would only throw fists because there's someone backing him up. Bertus was completely shocked with the answer and couldn't find to question him anymore. Bertus said he had now realized that Reinhardt acted so only because of his anger. Reinhardt maintained a calm demeanor as he could sense Bertus didn't believe him to be a secret royal blood but was just curious of what he could be hiding. Hence, he decided to keep acting like a nutcase in front of the prince. Deep into his thoughts, Reinhardt had his tea and Bertus starting laughing out loud. He said he was laughing at the honesty of Reinhardt's answer and also because he was now convinced that Reinhardt was no royalty. This conviction was because had Reinhardt been a royal, he would have held the teacup like one. Reinhardt was taken aback to know Bertus read him just by the way he held his cup. Bertus said there was always the chance of Reinhardt being attacked when not on the temple grounds for hitting a Schwarz royal. Reinhardt replied that he would be safe since even outside of temple, killing a royal class student in the capital would be punishable. Reinhardt could have swayed the conversation by saying that he knew Heinrich was long abandoned by the Schwarz family, but that would only make Bertus even more suspicious. Hence he let it be. Bertus said he never realized he would like someone as pompous as Reinhardt, and exclaimed that life at temple would now be interesting. He thoughtfully asked if Reinhardt loved the empire and why. Reinhardt replied that he loved the empire for money. After all, they let a pauper like him to live in this palace. Bertus was amazed to know Reinhardt was from the streets and that his loyalty had clear grounds. Bertus then went on in his explanation of what he meant by giving the example of ants. Just like an ant colony has hierarchy of the queen, soldiers and worker ants, the human society is divided into paupers, nobles, earls, barons and more. But the prince didn't care about any of it since he had the liberty to act like a spoiled brat. As per Bertus, he acquired this liberty to be a bastard due to his power, but he said that Reinhardt was a bastard without such power. He went ahead to say that his eloquence differed from that of a street urchin and he seemed pretty smart for being a pauper. Even after confrontation from Reinhardt that he had no abilities, Bertus said they'll know what he is hiding from them in the future. Bertus was interested to be friends with Reinhardt since empty-headed talents meant nothing to him. He would rather utilize someone with brains. Bertus advised him to take control of his anger and took his leave. He said he'll discuss more important matters with Reinhardt once he becomes certain of his loyalty. The students were quite excited for the next day. After all, it was the very first weekend in the temple after the new session started. Strolling by the exquisite gardens of the temple, Reinhardt saw others still gossiping about him. Everyone was talking about how good Bertus is, even to the hot-headed bastard Reinhardt. All the students by now had formed their own group of friends while Reinhardt was all alone. No one dared to talk to him except Ludwig from Class B, who was also pulled away into safety away from Reinhardt, as per his friends. With nothing else to do and definitely no one to hang around with, Reinhardt decided to visit his allies, the Rotary Gang. Exiting the temple gates while being deep into his thoughts, Reinhardt didn't realize the shadows which followed him right till under the bridge. Seated inside the sewer lines, Irene and Reinhardt discussed how things were at the temple. Irene got concerned about his rendezvous with Bertus. She said that the prince taking interest in him could turn out to be dangerous. Reinhardt informed her that Princess Charlotte had certain superpowers which were being kept secret from others. He wanted to find out about it and Irene said she would let Sarkagar know about this order. Irene also requested Reinhardt not to visit Sarkagar or Elleris since some of his classmates were following him. Reinhardt was flabbergasted to know he let down his guard so easily, and the rumors which would now spread across the temple about him. He then proceeded to return to the temple premises, deciding not to visit his allies again. The royal class students were waiting for him with a cold snare in the common room. Kair referred to him as a beggar, saying that they all knew he had been under the bridge. To their shock, Reinhardt calmly accepted that he was from the streets. He said it was annoying that they all kept pushing the matter. Reinhardt said that had he been in their place, he would be scared to know his background. Since he had tasted both the sweetness and bitterness of the streets, he knew how to handle every situation and went ahead to threaten them. Reinhardt was able to scare them away, saying he would not hesitate to turn their eyes into juggling props. With his bullies watching him in utter shock and fear, he took his leave from the room, saying kids should just play like kids instead of messing with him. The whole day had been very tiring, hence he went on to have some rest in his dormitory. Reinhardt lay there clouded with the thoughts of his classmates, the rumors that would go around now, and how to unlock self-suggestion talent he had bought. A sudden knock on the door interrupted his thoughts, and he thought his classmates had come again to pick up a fight with him. Quite angry, he opened the door at the second knock, screaming and asking if they wanted to lose their eyes so badly. He was shocked to see Ellen standing there. She said a certain senior had asked all the students to gather in the gym. He went along with her and saw all his classmates lying on all fours as a punishment, at the orders of their royal class senior Redina. On being scolded by her, Ellen went ahead to join the others, but Reinhardt stood his ground. The senior screamed at him again and said to the others that maybe he was short of hearing. Scared at the thought of the punishment getting worse, Harriet questioned Reinhardt what he was thinking and to do as he was being told to. Reinhardt bluntly asked Redina what was so great about being a senior. Redina was quite shorter in height than Reinhardt. He refused to do anything she ordered him to do and even threatened her. On the verge of tears, she quivered in fear and questioned him if he even knew who she was. He warned to flick her head and said she should behave like a senior if she wanted to be respected like one. Redina cried and ran away while all the other classmates watched the whole scene in a complete shock. Reinhardt told everyone to get up and explain how all this happened. Kayer explained that this was supposed to be a tradition for each generation of Class A. In order to prevent students from abusing positions they hold outside the temple, an upper year representative with a commoner background is tasked to discipline the freshmen. Also, every year freshmen were pressurized by their seniors to stay ahead of Class B. On the other hand, seniors and freshmen of Class B would always get along with other having a good time. Harriet called Reinhardt as a beggar and questioned whether he would take responsibility for things if they went wrong. She was shocked to hear it did not matter to him if the seniors thought badly about them. He said to everyone that they could always inform the teachers if the seniors threatened them. Reinhardt laughed at their situation and said even the beggar like him had more dignity than the royals who just acted like they had no backbones. Harriet got angry and tried to push away the blame from herself, threatening to kill Reinhardt. She didn't realize Reinhardt took her words literally. He shouted at her, saying that status or gender were no differentiators at the temple, where everyone is judged solely on the basis of their talent, hence she should not act like a big shot and spew out whatever comes to her mind. Harriet trembled with anger and fear alike when Reinhardt called her an idiot for threatening to kill him. Suddenly the door flung open with a bang and a handful of angry seniors walked in with teary-eyed Redina. The strongest looking guy asked for the one who hurt Redina. Redina pointed out at Reinhardt and the senior approached him. He asked him his name and questioned which royalty or nobility he belonged to. Reinhardt said he was neither of those and proudly exclaimed that he was a beggar from the streets. His classmates laughed and were checked upon by the other seniors. The big guy was flabbergasted to see Reinhardt's courage and punched him right in the stomach. Everyone went into a shock as no one had thought things would become this serious. The big guy continued to punch Reinhardt and grounded him with blood streaming down his nose and mouth. Reinhardt tried to punch him back, which made him even angrier. He held his hair and kicked him in his guts as his classmates watched in horror. Reinhardt suddenly grabbed the big guy by his balls and squeezed at them with full might. The big guy was in tears, screaming in pain. The other seniors tried to approach them but were stopped by Reinhardt, who threatened to rip off the big guy's body parts if anyone came near. Reinhardt made him beg for mercy as he withered in pain. He let him go after a while, and Redina called him a psycho pervert as they departed. To Reinhardt's surprise, one senior had stayed back and said she wanted to talk to him. She was Adriana from second year royal class and explained that they weren't doing all this from their free will. This tradition had been going around since generations, and hence the upper years were putting pressure on them. She went on to say Redina was a soft-hearted person, hence she must have suffered a great deal from having to harm others. But she did not have a choice since she was forced to do so by the upperclassmen. Reinhardt questioned why didn't they simply refuse to do so, and Adriana said that had they not done it, the third years would have. She said as one advances in year, it becomes harder to control one's strength, and asked whether Reinhardt would have acted like this in front of them as well. She said he could get in trouble with the upperclassmen, and Reinhardt asked her to tell them to meet him. Adriana could not believe that he set up a meeting with the upperclassmen itself for Monday night. He said he'll see if they can tell Bertus de Guardias to lie down before them as well. The cool breeze brushed their hair as Reinhardt and Bertus sat in the balcony discussing the issue over tea in the balcony. Bertus said that Reinhardt had sold his name. He was aware of such traditions of the royal class and was wondering if they were being cautious of him. Reinhardt said it would be a funny sight if the upperclassmen showed up. First of all, they wouldn't be able to ask Bertus to bow down, and even if they did, they would have a heart attack to make the Prince of Empire do such a thing. However, Bertus repeated the fact that Reinhardt had sold out his name as the prince and not his classmate. Reinhardt got cautious and thought he might have to use Sarkagar's ring to get out of the situation. The prince said the usual punishment for this is culling of 3 generations of Reinhardt's family, but it seemed only fair, and rather better that he used Reinhardt once just like he had. Bertus ordered Reinhardt to observe Princess Charlotte and inform if he find out anything unusual about her. Reinhardt froze on the spot but had no other choice other than to agree to it. He was returning to his dorm when he saw Harriet sitting on a couch having tea. She looked at him and turned away. Reinhardt couldn't resist the urge to irritate her and went on to say idiot aloud. Harriet shouted at him and he replied he had not called her out, so why did she reacted? Harriet was stupefied by the answer and felt both humiliated and angry. Reinhardt made it worse by saying he had been correct all along for calling her an idiot. Harriet was infuriated and stood up to confront Reinhardt. She kept repeating that she was not an idiot, and Reinhardt just calmly replied that her reaction made it fun for him to tease her. Harriet blushed, not knowing what to say. Reinhardt casually said that she was cute and Harriet went into a complete shock. She stood there asking him to explain what he had said. Reinhardt made his way towards his dorm, casually saying that even though she was genius, being a kid, it was good that she was able to act like one. He said he liked her for her childish behavior and asked her to go to sleep or else she won't grow any taller. Harriet was unable to find any words of retaliation and was confused whether to feel angry or happy. Finally, it was a busy Monday morning at the temple, which had serious effects from the events of the weekend. The same group of seniors were huddled around Reinhardt. The big guy from before introduced himself as Art de Gardes, the Gardes family heir. He said that since Reinhardt had seriously undermined his reputation, he was challenging him for a duel in order to restore his honor. Reinhardt had the liberty to choose the time and place for the duel, and an observer would look over them as well. Reinhardt put the conversation in clear words that since a senior was unable to defeat his junior, he would want to fight him in a fair duel, given he was bursting with shame. Art controlled his anger while the other seniors facepalmed and Redina screamed at him for cheating. Reinhardt said she was being too lenient with Art as he was the one to skip his classes just to turn him into a bloody pancake. Art replied that if he wanted to reject this honorable duel and embrace his disgrace, then he was free to do so. He said this would make Reinhardt admit to himself that he could only win through filthy tricks. The whole class held their breath, turning back to observe the whole scenario. To Redina's absolute shock, Reinhardt agreed for the duel. Art left the classroom, warning Reinhardt that he would not fall for the same cheap trick twice and won't go easy on him just because he was weaker. He pledged to engrave in his body what it meant to challenge a senior's authority. All the classmates got quite scared of the duel, but Reinhardt had something else on his mind. He was stopped by Redina on the stairs, who tried to reason out with him to apologize to Art. She reminded Reinhardt that Art was a 3 of the senior class, which made him quite strong and definitely someone impossible for Reinhardt to defeat. Reinhardt didn't heed to her advice and went ahead on his way. He had not accepted the duel offer because he was crazy. He did so in order to put himself in a psychologically harrowing situation. This just might help him to unlock the self-suggestion talent. After all, he could not possibly let it sit there locked like an ornament. He agreed to himself that though he was nervous, he would have to go through all this. His status window flashed open, marking a new event of the duel with Art de Gardes. The goal was to proceed with the duel, and he would be awarded points both in the cases of victory and defeat. Reinhardt thought that while there was a little chance of him winning the duel, it was possible to avoid the duel itself, since the goal was to proceed with the duel for which he would be rewarded. He wondered why they were rewarding him even in the case of defeat and thought that all this was a little depressing. So, he went ahead to inform the teacher of all the events which had occurred and the duel which was promised upon. Mr. Eppenhauser said there was no issue if the duel was agreed upon by both the parties, and confirmed that it would take place 2 weeks from now in the indoor training room of the first-year dormitory. Reinhardt realized that this was the only person in front of whom he ended up shaking of fear no matter what. Naturally, rumors already spread through Class A and B. Ludwig expressed his concern for him in the next physical training class and even advised him to apologize to the senior instead of going for the duel. Reinhardt asked him not to speak to him while running, as it was making him even more breathless. Little did they realize as Princess Charlotte watched them with apprehension. Reinhardt was completely out of breath after running the 20 laps and somehow dragged himself through the corridor. He was stopped by a familiar voice to stop. He turned around and was shocked to see the princess. She angrily handed him a neatly folded paper, turned around and walked away before Reinhardt could say anything at all. He watched as she walked away and was reminded that just like Bertus had asked him to watch over Charlotte, maybe she also had similar business with him. He was bewildered to read that she had asked him to stay in the classroom after the lecture, and that she would come to meet him. Surprised at her cold expressions, Reinhardt anxiously waited for the lecture to get over, thinking that this would be the first time they would have a proper conversation since they left the Demon King's castle. Finally, Charlotte came and Reinhardt questioned how could she possibly just hand over a note and run away. He continued with his casual attitude, asking her what the matter was, when she coldly shut him up with a single sentence saying that she knew who he was. With this, its second part ends here. So if you like the video, then hit that like button and leave a comment for the next part. Most important, subscribe and press the bell icon for notification. Rest I will meet you in new video. Till then, bye.